Here we are. Good morning. Good morning, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. And today is episode 2 on our journey through the book of Esther. So what does that mean? What is all this about? PB Reads the Bible. I'm PB, Pastor Brian, and this is an opportunity for us to gather together as a small group to share life together and to, excuse me, read from the Bible and talk about what it means and what it doesn't mean and help you to understand some things and help me to understand some things. I don't claim to have all the answers, but the stuff I share with you is stuff I have learned or stuff I am learning right now along with you as we go through these things. We've done a bunch of books of the Bible, and today we are doing, right now we're working on Esther, and today this is episode 2. Yesterday we did a lot of context, talk about the setting and stuff like that. And today we'll actually start reading from the book of Esther, at least chapter 1, maybe even part of chapter 2. We'll see how things go. Ooh, excuse me. And go from there. I'm thinking we might get through the first 7 verses of chapter 2, just to set some things up. But anyway, thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining me. It's so wonderful to be able to do this, to gather together in this way. And that's what we're doing. We're gathering and we're sharing life together. Some of you are joining me at 9 o'clock on Wednesday, February 15th, while others, excuse me, are joining at other times. We're still joining together. That's the miracle of, well, it's a miracle of technology, but it's the miracle, one of the miracles of God, that we are able to connect across time and place to be together. And so whenever you're joining, whether it's Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock or some other time, let me know. Because otherwise I just see how many people are here or how many accounts are logged in and how many views we've had. I like to know who. So I see we've got some folks saying good morning, checking in. Good morning, Marcia. Good morning, Maureen. And good morning, John and Cindy. Good to have you folks with me today. Good to be together with you. Excuse me. Itchy nose. That means I'm going to get in a fight or something, right? One of those old wives' tales. And we are sharing life together. So when you've got joys and concerns, things that lift you up or things that you need to have lifted up, let's share it with one another. You can post them in there and we'll keep each other lifted in prayer, surrounded in prayer. And of course, prayer is what we're gonna do in just a moment here. Good morning, Marilyn. Yeah, today is Wednesday, so today's going to be it for this week. We'll be back at this on Tuesday next week, and it's only Tuesday next week because Wednesday next week is Ash Wednesday, and I'll be doing ashes down the road at the coffee shop, or offering, or so I should say, offering ashes down the road at the coffee shop. So just Tuesday next week after today, but between Wednesday and Tuesday, there is a Sunday. And so Sunday, we will be, of course, having worship at 8:15 and 10:45. Love to have you join us in person for either of those. But if you can't make it in person, the 10:45 is live stream. So join us for worship, become a worship participant. 10:45 on Sunday. I noticed yesterday that someone shared yesterday's video, yesterday's presentation. So I'm humbled to do that folks would do that, but go ahead and do that. If you think that this would be beneficial to one of your friends or something, share the link for our page, of course, but also just for our videos for the Bible study. Invite others to join us. It's not too late, of course. So John, I know John's going to be having a little procedure tomorrow. So John, we're going to keep you in our prayers. I encourage everyone to keep John in your prayers throughout today and tomorrow, especially as he goes through that. Our friend Gooey is home from the hospital. At least I'm pretty sure he's home from the hospital. If he's not, he's coming home today. That's been a confusing little thing there. So let's have a prayer and ask for God's presence with us this morning. Gracious God, you know what's on our hearts and our minds. And yeah, we lift to you. Well, we lift to you all who need you, and all of our family and friends who have health issues taking place. And in particular, of course, we've mentioned John as he's preparing for that procedure tomorrow. And we pray for Cindy as she sits with him and waits with him and waits through it tomorrow. And we pray for Gooey and Nancy, giving you thanks for healing that has taken place, and selfishly asking for more. And now, God, as we return to the Bible, to these scriptures, these texts, help us to truly understand what is taking place and help us to learn from them. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. So we're going to take a look at Esther. Right? We're looking at Esther. The first chapter is an introduction. Here's some things to take note of. There's only one character in the first chapter who makes it through the whole book, and that would be King Ahasuerus. The other characters in the first chapter quickly disappear, at least those who are named. All right. So, picking up, or beginning, chapter 1, verse 1. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus, the same Ahasuerus who ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were present, while he displayed the great wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and pomp of his majesty for many days, 180 days in all. Pause. At first glance, first blush, this sounds like poor writing. It almost sounds like poor writing, like the author's not very good. Kind of repetitive in what he says. And we're going to see this a few times throughout the book. It said, however, thinking about it a little bit differently, remembering that it is a fictional story, but he's writing it as an imitation of a historical document. He's writing it how the Persians probably, or at least possibly, would have written things. Very overly pompous, we might say. I would say. Very, very bureaucratically and filled with red tape almost. So he says, King Ahasuerus, who ruled over, uses the name twice within the first sentence, right? So it's he's actually he's poking fun at the Persian Empire and how they did things and how they wrote things. That's what the author is doing here. So rather than thinking it's poor writing, it's actually very clever writing by this author. Now he says how large the kingdom was and the empire and the Persian Empire, and he's not really wrong. He's not exaggerating it. The Ahasuerus, there was no emperor named Ahasuerus, but the comparison is made to Xerxes as one of the emperors of the Persian Empire. And during his reign, his empire did spread basically from India to all the way to Ethiopia. It was a very large kingdom. It was a very large kingdom, very large empire. So he's not exaggerating there. Where he does exaggerate, and is, again, for the point of making fun of the rulers, the emperors, is this idea of a banquet for 180 days. I mean, let's just think about that for a minute. If we read this through too quickly, and if we think of it as literal and all that. If we think of it as a historical thing, can you imagine the government shutting down for half a year? And 180 days is 6 months. Is 6 months, and he's got everything, right? He's got everything at this banquet. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were present. So everybody that runs everything in his government is attending a banquet for 6 months. Obviously, the author is exaggerating, being hyperbolic, and probably with the intent of making fun of the king, of the emperor, and of the Persian government, the empire itself, how ridiculous they are being. He is correct, though. He says in verse 2, it says that he sat on his royal throne, which has the context of sat in safety and security, that his kingdom was established, and he didn't have any troubles. And that's fairly accurate to relatively close to the beginning of Xerxes' rule. He had settled the last troubles, which I believe were in Egypt or something like that, in that area, if I remember correctly. And he did have relative peace in the empire. But did he ever shut down his kingdom government for 6 months? No. All right. The point that the author is making, he's using some language here in these next few verses that speak of the wealth of the empire and their use of their wealth, the waste of the wealth, where they're spending their money. They're spending their money foolishly. It is part of the point of what's taking place. All right. So picking up from there, verse 5, we'll read from there, probably 5 through 9. When these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in the citadel of Susa, both great and small, a banquet lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and blue hangings tied with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rings and marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and colored stones. Drinks were served in golden goblets of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. Drinking was by flagons without restraint, for the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. Pause. Okay, wow. So we hear this description of this one. So not only did he have, as the author saying, that he had a 180-day banquet for the whole army and all of the governors and all that stuff for 180 days. Then he went right into a 7-day banquet for everyone in the citadel of Susa. Oh, good morning, Shar. Good morning, Shar. So what does he mean by that? Okay, what is Susa and stuff? I'm going to share my screen and share a picture. A map, you say. This is a map approximating, anyway, the Persian Empire at the time being described, approximately. And here it goes from India all the way over to Kush, which is Libya, and Egypt, and up here into Thrace, which is part of Greece. Okay, and all that. And at the time, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. That gave you the full view. There were actually four capitals in the empire. 4 capitals in the empire: Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana. Babylon is been described by the historians, and it might have been Josephus, I don't remember, but historians say that Babylon, it was the capital during the winter. But when things got a little too hot come springtime, because it's pretty hot in Babylon in the spring, apparently, they moved the capital to the city of Susa. And then in the summer, when it got too hot in Susa, they went north to Ecbatana. When were they at Persepolis? I don't know. But that was a 4th capital, just in case, maybe, I don't know. But Susa is the setting for this story. The author selected Susa. So he does not have the king moving around from capital to capital as history says he did, but that this is all set in Susa. Because of his understanding of Susa, we think that the author probably lived in the area of Susa, perhaps even during or similar to the time he is describing. Okay, because he seems to understand Susa geography and the politics and government of the time. Now, that passage, though, said the Susa citadel. So the author uses Susa in 2 different ways throughout the book. One is the entire city of Susa. The other, he speaks about the Susa citadel. And I might have this wrong. I don't claim to have it all right, but I believe what the author is referring to when he speaks about a citadel is, we might almost say, a city within a city. It's the palace and some surrounding grounds, probably with a wall around that, in the middle of the city of Susa. Now, just because there was a wall around it doesn't mean it wasn't open and accessible to the surrounding city. It probably was, at least some of the time. But a citadel is where people could retreat to in a time of war and in a time of siege. If the enemy is at your gates, you pull back. And so that's possibly what he's talking about when he says the citadel of Susa. So it's where the government is going to be too, right? And his description of this citadel, and remembering, excuse me, this isn't even it's not in the palace. He's in the garden. This banquet is taking place in the king's garden, but he's got expensive curtains and fine linens and silver and marble and gold flagons and pavement of porphyry, which I have no idea what that is, but more marble and mother of pearl. So he's describing the ornateness just of this garden setting for this banquet and how lavish everything is. There's some interesting words here that we need to understand before we move on. It says that wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. So he's speaking about how the wine was flowing quite freely. All right, and so the king was holding nothing back. It's a lavish party. Drinking was by flagons without restraint. For the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. What did that mean? Historically, historians say that at a Persian banquet, you drank when the king drank. If the king took a drink, you drank, whether or not you wanted to, whether or not you were thirsty, whether or not you thought you had enough to drink, you drank if the king told you to drink. Okay. So it sounds like he has removed that rule without restraint. So you want to drink more than the king drinks, you can drink more than the king drinks. If you want to drink less than the king drinks, you can drink less than the king drinks. Because the king had given orders to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. So how much you drink now is entirely up to you for these next 7 days. The author is he's talking about, what the king wants, what the king orders is what happens, is kind of what the author is trying to set up here. This is a little bit of a foreshadowing. Now, that last verse that we read, verse 9, furthermore, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. 2 things I did mention yesterday, but just to remind you, King Xerxes did not have a queen named Vashti. I forget what her name was. He did have a wife, a queen, and she was his queen throughout his reign. She was not named Vashti. So it's another place. It's obviously a fictional tale. Says that she gave a banquet to the women in the palace of King Ahasuerus. Women in Persia, in the Persian Empire, women were allowed to eat with the men. That's not what this is saying. Okay, this isn't saying that they had to be separate. They were allowed to eat together, but when the men started drinking, the women left. Okay, so that's the big deal here. And the men are drinking, so the women are going to have their own banquets somewhere else. Okay. So picking up from there. On the 7th day, when the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who attended him, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing the royal crown, in order to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. Pause. Now, some of this is conjecture, but it's based on traditional understandings, including by rabbis of centuries ago. All right, as well as other stuff. First of all, why name all these eunuchs? Again, the author is kind of poking fun at how presumably the Persian Empire would have written things, because they would have been tied up in details. But the 7, notice that number 7, we've right here, we've encountered it twice, and we're going to hear it more. 7 has always been an important number. Yes, we call it a lucky number, right? But in ancient times, not only in Jewish traditions, but in other traditions, 7 is a completeness, which, hey, 7 is the days of a week, right? So it's a full week. It's a complete week. So, but we're seeing it here on the 7th day. So it's the fullness, the completeness of the week. And he's got 7 eunuchs. He has 7 eunuchs. Now, the eunuchs were actually served an important purpose in the Persian Empire, and they were very close to the king. Excuse me. But why name them all? We don't know. Presumably, he's just kind of poking fun at how the Persians would have written it had it been a document. Now, so he's merry with wine. He's drunk. He's been drinking for 7 days, is what the author is saying. And all of this stuff is entirely tongue-in-cheek. The guy is being, he's poking fun at everything that's taken place. So he's drunk, and he sends the eunuchs to bring his wife, to bring Queen Vashti, wearing the royal crown. What does that mean? Well, some have interpreted that, including those ancient rabbis of old, that he sent to have her brought before him wearing only the royal crown, to show the peoples and the officials her beauty, for she was fair to behold. If that's a correct interpretation, which it certainly can be, then he's being quite bold and obviously drunk, right? That interpretation does make the next verse make sense. Verse 12, but Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. At this, the king was enraged, and his anger burned within him. Pause. Why would she refuse to come if all he wanted was to have her there, be present? Well, she probably wouldn't, but it says specifically he wanted to show off her beauty. Maybe she was reluctant for that, but maybe it is that he only wanted her to wear her crown and nothing else. All right. For whatever reason, she declines. Now, the words at the end, the king was enraged and his anger burned within him. This is really, at this point, this is just a private snub, right? You would think that the king and the queen can work this out on their own. Yeah, he's upset. Figure when he sobers up, it'd be okay. But we're going to see what kind of we're going to see what kind of person the king is. The author is going to make it pretty obvious that he is maybe I should say spoiler alert. The author is going to describe him basically as a buffoon who is controlled by emotions and easily manipulated by those around him. Okay? He is definitely controlled by emotions and is manipulated by those around him. Picking up from there, 13. Then the king consulted the sages who knew the laws. Pause. Rather than just trying to go into the queen and talking to her himself, or waiting till tomorrow when he sobered up and having a conversation with her, in his anger, right? While he's in this very emotional state, he consults the sages who knew the laws. For this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and custom. And those next to him were Karshena, Shatar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsena, and Mamukan, the 7 officials of Persia and Media, who had access to the king and sat first in the kingdom. Pause. Again, we're seeing that number 7, right? And he names them all. The author names them all. This actually is fairly accurate historically too, that the king had these 7 special officials who were his right-hand men. And it dates back before Ahasuerus, back to possibly Darius, or I don't remember who, because there were 7 people who intervened. They helped out the king. They stayed on the king's side. They informed him about a coup that was about to take place, which the king was able to avert and stop and probably execute those guilty. But as a result, they were elevated to this special place of honor and given all kind of special things. So apparently these men are their successors. Okay. And so he consults them because they knew the laws. They knew the laws and the customs and the customs. Picking up from there in verse 15. According to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus conveyed by the eunuchs? Pause. So he's turning this into a matter of state when it should just be a matter between husband and wife. Then Memucan said in the presence of the king and the officials, "Not only has Queen Vashti done wrong to the king, but also to all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the province of King Ahasuerus. For this deed of the queen will be made known to all women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the king's behavior, will rebel against the king's officials, and there will be no end of contempt and wrath." Pause. Wow, right? So the king has turned it into a matter of state, and Memucan has elevated it beyond that. The ridiculousness of this event and of everything that he's saying and taking place here is obvious when we take the time to actually read it and think about what we're reading. None of it really makes sense. This is like, oh my gosh, you really think that? Right? So, but he's turned it into, oh, this isn't just between you and her. This is going to affect everybody in the whole land. No. The only person who was insulted was the king. And it very easily could have remained just between the two of them. Picking up from there, verse 19, "If it pleases the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be altered, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another, who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, vast as it is, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike." This advice pleased the king and the officials, and the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, declaring that every man should be master in his own house. Pause, although I'm going to add something. The NRSV has it in a postscript, and speak according to the language of his people. Pause, and actually end of chapter 1, right? Yes, that ends chapter 1. Okay. The Persian postal service was top-notch. The Persian postal service was top-notch. The king needed, remember the size of his kingdom, right? From India all the way to Libya. Huge kingdom, huge empire. The king needed a good postal service to get commands, orders, directives, whatever, edicts from Babylon, Persia, Ecbatana, wherever, Persepolis, wherever he was, to the entire kingdom. They were good. They were top-notch. By talking about them and talking about this order, the author, again, is making fun of everything, that they're going to use this amazing postal service to send such a ridiculous message, to the entire kingdom. Do you think the people in India had any idea that Queen Vashti had insulted the king? No. But they're going way over the top. So with what they're saying and what they're doing. But the author is doing an important thing here. The author, here's the point. Yes, the author is making fun of the empire, the king and his sages. He is also setting the stage. Esther can't enter the stage until Queen Vashti is gone. Until this thing happens. She's standing off stage waiting, we might say, right? She's about to enter the stage, but she can't do that until this takes place. So he's setting the stage for Esther to come in. He is also foreshadowing. He's foreshadowing some things. Now, it's historically wrong. It's historically inaccurate. But he says it in here. He says it in here, verse 19. Let this royal order go out, let it be written, so that it may not be altered. Now, historically, that's inaccurate. Historians have not been able to find anything indicating that that was the rule in the Persian Empire. It's a plot device by the author, and it foreshadows what's going to take place later in the book. But he can't have it take place later in the book unless he has it happen now. Okay? And we're at 9:36. Let's, shall we? Yeah, let's press on, right? Let's read the beginning. Let's at least see Esther come on stage. Chapter 2. After these things, pause. How long? We don't know. We don't know. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Pause. So how long? We don't know, but a period of time has elapsed. That's all the author is saying. And he remembered Vashti. What did he remember? What did he remember? It does say what she had done and what had been decreed against her. And how does he remember it? We're not told anything about that. Is he saddened? Does he remember her in these events with regret? Does he remember her and is lonely and misses her? We're not told. We can presume that the author is intentionally vague, allowing us to have any or all of these emotions taking place within Ahasuerus, because he is this emotional guy, we've been told, right? Picking up. Then the king's servants who attended him said, pause. Now, these aren't the same ones as the sages. These are different. His servants are probably just young men who are there to attend to his needs and take care of things like that. Then the king's servants who attended him said, let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in the citadel of Susa under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetic treatments be given to them, and let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. Pause. Okay, so these are young men who are servants, attendants to the king. And let's go through this a little bit clearer and carefully with what they're asking. It says, let beautiful young virgins. And I do see that both the NRSV and NIV translate it as virgins. Literally, young women of marriageable age. Granted, women at the time, often, if not usually, went directly from puberty to marriage. So they probably were virgins, but it's young women of marriageable age be sought out for the king, and have them brought from everywhere in the empire. Again, exaggeration, right? From all the provinces. That would be quite the harem if going from India to Kush, and all the young women of marriageable age, or at least all the most beautiful of them. Right, so there are two. Basically, there are two brain cramp. There are two requirements. That's the word, Brian, for these women. One, that they be beautiful. Two, that they be young of marriageable age. That they be of marriageable age. So beautiful and marriageable. And that's it. That's it. That's what these young men want from them, right? Taken care of by the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, let their cosmetic treatments be given to them. The author there is describing the heightened sexuality of the empire. Okay, that's kind of the point there. That's kind of the point there, right? The Persian court is very sensual, and so they want these cosmetic treatments to be given. That's what they're saying there. And let the girl who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Her ability to please the king, pleases the king. It's a deliberately vague phrase. It's a very deliberately vague expression, but it does have the connotations of sexually pleasing the king. In other words, the beautiful young marriageable woman who is best in bed will be your next queen. Okay, instead of Vashti. This pleased the king, and he did so. So a couple last comments about this. And again, historically, this is wrong. It couldn't take place. The Persian Empire had a rule that the king could only be married once, could only have one king, right? I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The Persian Empire had a rule that his wife had to be from certain families. That's right. Sorry. If he was going to marry and have a queen, she had to come from one of the 7 noble Persian families. Those are those people the sages, right? The 7 noble families. So the author is pulling from other things, not historical, but non-historical documents. We might think of the story of Scheherazade from the 1001 Arabian Nights, okay? Or the story of David with Abishag, and I think she was Shunammite. All right, so the author seems to be pulling from some of those kind of thoughts when he comes up with this. All right, last couple of verses. We're going to read 5 through 7. Yeah, these last couple of verses, 5 through 7, then we'll pause for the day. Now there was a Jew in the citadel of Susa, whose name was Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shemaiah, son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with King Jeconiah of Judah when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had carried away, or whom Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his cousin, for she had neither father nor mother. The girl was fair and beautiful, and when her father and her mother died, Mordecai adopted her as his own daughter. Pause. So we read these couple verses, and not knowing the title of the book, we and the original author, the original readers, would assume Mordecai is going to be the main character, the main protagonist, and the hero of the story, because so much is told about him, that he's a Jew, that he's in the citadel of Susa, meaning he's not just in the city, but he must be part of the government and fairly important if he is from the citadel area of the city. It names he was the son of Jair, okay, which we don't really know of Jair, but they think probably was his father, and son of Shemaiah, son of Kish. Now, those two may not be directly, grandfather, great grandfather, or so to speak, of Mordecai. There's probably a time difference between them, because Shemaiah is presumed, I'm not the only one that thinks this, I guess you would say, biblical scholars, Shemaiah, we might remember from the story of David, was the one that cursed David as David was leaving, was spitting at him and stuff like that, because he was a Benjaminite. And this does say it was a Benjaminite. So he was related to Saul, and he blamed David for everything that happened to Saul. And Kish was Saul's father. Kish was Saul's father. So let us assume that is correct, that those are the two people in there. Shemaiah, who was a relative, a cousin, nephew, whatever, of Saul, and Kish, who was Saul's father, are the two people that the author is speaking of here. Now, the NRSV says Kish had been carried away, but that's in verse 6, and the NIV says the son of Kish, who had been carried away into exile. In Hebrew, it's vague. In Hebrew, it says he had been carried away into exile. So it doesn't matter who of them. We know, obviously, that Shemaiah and Kish were not carried away into exile. Maybe it means Jair, or somewhere in between the two. We don't know. It probably can't be it can't be Mordecai, because that was too many kings ago, too long of a time period. Mordecai would have to be like 120 years old if it literally meant Mordecai. So it's possibly Jair, most likely not, probably somebody else somewhere in there. It's intentionally vague, probably. All right. Mordecai had brought up Hadassah, that is her Hebrew name, her Jewish name, for Esther. It was common for people in exile, and just read the book of Daniel, and you'll see that was one of his names, as well as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Their real names: Hananiah, Mishael, and I can't think of the third one. Anyway. Those were their slave names, or their exile names. That's the same case here. Hadassah is her given name, her Hebrew name, but Esther is her Persian name. Now, it means star. Esther means star. However, it can be a connection with the Babylonian goddess Ishtar. However, in Hebrew, it would be spelled out. Well, the English version of the Hebrew letters would be STR, because in Hebrew you don't put the vowels. You only put consonants. So the consonantal spelling of Esther would be STR, which can also be translated as a Hebrew word meaning to hide. Okay, which is cool, because she hides who she is. She hides the fact that she is actually Jewish. Remember, we'll see that she hides her Jewish identity. So, who is going to be the main protagonist, right? We might think the hero is going to be Mordecai, but we have here we'll find out. There are some different understandings for the relationship. Let's just go with the simple one that it says there. He adopts her, basically. He takes care of her because she's an orphan. That's part of the important thing here, right? She's an orphan living in captivity, in exile, and what can happen? Of course, we're going to find out. Spoiler alert, she becomes queen. So it's sort of that rags to riches, orphan makes good, little orphan Annie type thing. Well, my friends, that's going to be it for today. Thank you for joining me. I hope that this has been beneficial, that you've learned something or relearned something this day. And as you go about your days, not just this day and every day, keep those eyes and ears, physical and spiritual, open to everything that our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and in the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, "Thank you, God," and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.